Welcome to another episode where we look at history and culture through the lens of beer. Today you're joining us as we explore the really fascinating story of the ancient Andean Wari Empire. They were around roughly from 600 to 1100 AD, and forget dusty textbooks because we're diving into archaeological research here, specifically the work of Dr. Donna Nash from Arizona State University. We're trying to uncover a surprising element of their society, the absolutely pivotal role of Chicha beer. You might be astonished, honestly, when reading Dr. Nash's paper, to find out just how central this drink seems to have been, central to building and maintaining their whole civilization centuries ago.
It really is quite remarkable, especially when you think about the sheer scope of the Wari Empire. They controlled most of what we now call Peru. That's a huge stretch, about 1,100 kilometers north to south. And their capital, near modern Ayacucho, it was massive, possibly bigger than 12 square kilometers, a proper urban center for its time. And what's really intriguing, something Dr. Nash's research really highlights, is the strong possibility that the Wari, well, they might have laid the groundwork for the later Inca Empire, pioneering institutions maybe, and ways of running a state that the Inca then took up and expanded on.
Absolutely. And when you look at the archaeological evidence Dr. Nash presents, you start seeing beer wasn't just, a casual drink for them. The findings really suggest it was a tool for diplomacy, even for control. Now, before we get too deep, let's just clarify something about this ancient brew, chicha. The term itself, chicha, it wasn't originally specific to South America, surprisingly.
Right. It seems the Spanish probably picked up the word somewhere else, and then they just sort of applied it broadly to any beer-like fermented drink they found here, as distinct from distilled spirits.
Gotcha. So when we talk about Wari Chicha, based on this research, we mean a whole range of fermented drinks.
Yeah.
Made from different things, and this is wild peanuts. Dr. Nash and others have found evidence for that.
Yeah, peanuts, corn, other things too. But what's particularly compelling in Dr. Nash's work is her focus on Sarabamba. The name itself means trunk-shaped hill. Gives you an idea of how imposing it must have been. This was a major frontier stronghold for the Wari. And her excavations there, they've turned up pretty convincing evidence of a large-scale brewery right next to a main plaza and what looks like a palace structure.
Can you help us picture this brewery, based on the research? What would it have felt like back then?
Well, the layout itself tells a story. They found a grinding room, and here's an amazing detail. They actually found knee impressions preserved in the floor. Yeah. Just imagine the hours women spent kneeling there, grinding the corn. There was also a separate area identified for sprouting the corn. That's the malting process, crucial for beer. And then the boiling room. It had these very specific hearths with stones placed vertically. That was probably to support the big round-bottomed or conical boiling pots really efficiently.
You can almost see it, can't you? The activity, the smell maybe,
Yeah.
and the scale of production.
Yeah.
This wasn't some small homebrew operation, was it?
Yeah.
According to Dr. Nash's findings.
Oh, not at all. Based on the size of the facilities, Dr. Nash estimates they could have potentially produced around 1,800 liters of beer in a single batch.
1,800 liters.
Yeah, it's a huge quantity. It strongly suggests they weren't just brewing for, regular daily needs. It points towards large festivals, big state gatherings, things like that. And interestingly, the research also looked into what they used for fuel. There was a smaller brewery found nearby at a site called Sahia, and that one seemed to use wood. But this big state brewery at Sarabamba, the main fuel source appears to have been dried guinea pig dung.
Guinea pig dung. That's definitely a detail you don't forget from Dr. Nash's paper.
It is pretty remarkable, and it connects to another fascinating bit of Wari culture. Guinea pigs were a really important food source, a delicacy even in the Andes, still are today. So finding their dung fueling this major brewery at an elite center like Sarabamba, it really underscores the importance, maybe even the prestige of this whole brewing operation.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit more. Thinking about what Dr. Nash's research suggests, you've got this large-scale brewery clearly linked to the state or the elite. Why? What was all this beer for?
Right. This is where it gets really interesting from a societal perspective. Dr. Nash draws some comparisons between the Wari and, say, the Roman Empire in terms of their centralized control. Just like the Romans had strategies to integrate the territories they conquered, the Wari likely used beer as a key tool, for building relationships with the peoples they brought into their empire, and also for dealing with neighboring states like the Tiwanaku Empire to their south. Dr. Nash's own research on that southern frontier, the interaction between Wari and Tiwanaku, sheds a lot of light on these dynamics.
So beer as a diplomatic lubricant, essentially, as suggested by Dr. Nash. How would that have actually worked?
Well, think about it. Sharing a drink is pretty universal, isn't it? for building connections, sealing agreements, even today. The Wari probably used Chicha in very similar ways. When dealing with groups like the Moche up north, some seem to have allied with them, or the Cajamarca kingdom, possibly allies, but maybe not fully conquered. We see echoes of this later with the Inca, right? There are historical accounts of the Inca using chicha in religious ceremonies, toasting the sun god Inti, for example, since they believed they descended from the sun, and also to finalize deals between nobles, often involving these special paired drinking cups, caros. Even just visiting a noble often meant bringing chicha to share as a greeting.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it seems highly likely, based on Dr. Nash's analysis of the Wari evidence, that they were using beer in comparable ways. For religion, yes, but also very much for statecraft, for politics.
Right. So this state-produced beer, was it just flowing freely for everyone in Wari society?
Okay.
Or does the archaeology suggest it was managed somehow, controlled?
The evidence from digging in regular houses, what archaeologists call household archaeology, points towards control. This is detailed in Dr. Nash's paper. Her findings show that the drinking cups, the fancy ones you'd use for chicha, they mainly turn up in tombs of wealthy people. And in the ruins of larger, more elaborate houses, you don't find many in the simpler, more modest homes.
Interesting.
Yeah, it suggests that during the main Wari period, making beer might have been an elite thing, or maybe tied specifically to religious institutions. What's also telling is that after the Wari Empire collapsed, later on, you start seeing evidence for more widespread beer making, using simpler methods, which kind of implies there were restrictions earlier during the Wari's height.
Why would they want to keep such a tight grip on it? What reasons does Dr. Nash explore?
Well, there could be several reasons. The brewing process itself, as we'll get into, wasn't simple. It was quite involved, needed specific resources, specific knowledge. Controlling the production meant controlling those resources, and maybe the knowledge too. Probably more importantly, given how beer seems to have been used in state events, in diplomacy, centralizing it gave the Wari elite a powerful tool, something they could bestow, something they could use to build loyalty and influence.
And what about the brewers themselves? Was it specialized work?
That seems likely too. Dr. Nash points out that even today, in Andean communities where traditional chicha is made, the full know-how isn't common knowledge. Often it's just a few people, frequently high-status women, who really know the entire process start to finish. Even if others, maybe men, help out with tasks like the heavy grinding.
That's a really fascinating parallel Dr. Nash draws. Suggests brewing knowledge itself could have been a kind of elite capital back then.
Exactly, which leads to this idea of, well, maybe not formal written laws, but something like sumptuary rules. Dr. Nash doesn't explicitly claim they had laws called that, but the pattern of where the cups are found. It suggests the Wari elite might have controlled who got the good chicha and when. A bit like how other societies restricted who could wear purple dye or certain furs,
Right. Restricting access to status symbols.
Precisely. Maybe proper chicha was mainly for state festivals. Or perhaps given out as a reward. People owed labor tax, working on state projects or farms. It's plausible they got food, maybe a weaker, everyday kind of beer while working. But the strong, proper stuff, that might have been reserved for special occasions, dished out by the state.
Let's dive into that process then. Based on Dr. Nash's research and the reconstructions, what did making Wari Chicha actually involve? Sounds pretty different from cracking open a modern kit.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds incredibly labor-intensive. And it took time. The key first step was malting the corn, basically, getting it to sprout for every single batch. And there are these interesting historical accounts from the region suggesting they actually thought worms in the corn were a good sign, meant it was sweet.
Worms? Okay.
Apparently so. They might have toasted split kernels first, too. Then came the grinding, likely multiple women kneeling for hours at those stone grinders we mentioned. The ground corn, the meal, was then boiled into a mash. Dr. Nash had an informant describe the consistency as being like pancake batter. This batter was added to boiling water, and it needed constant stirring and tasting. They had to judge readiness by taste and texture. No thermometers back then, obviously.
Right, relies purely on skill and experience.
Exactly. Then fermentation happened in these specific narrow-necked jars, which were often, interestingly, prepared with fat beforehand, maybe to seal the pottery pores. That's one idea. And the pitting, the etching inside these jars from the fermentation acids, that's a key clue archaeologists look for, especially for smaller-scale brewing sites.
What about flavoring or helping it ferment?
They likely used the berries from Chinus Malay, that's the Peruvian pepper tree. It would add flavor, but also maybe boost the sugar content, which helps the fermentation along.
And the yeast. That's always the big question with ancient brewing, isn't it? How did they get it to ferment reliably without buying packets of yeast? Dr. Nash discusses this, right?
Yeah, it's a crucial point. Since they boiled the mash, any wild yeast naturally on the corn would probably be killed. So the most likely scenario, based on Dr. Nash's analysis and how traditional brewing often works, is relying on wild yeasts already living in the brewing environment, especially in the fermentation jars themselves. Over time, with repeated use, the right kinds of yeast and bacteria would just colonize the pots. Or maybe the mash picked up yeast while it was cooling, perhaps on cloths or just from the air in the brewery. It wouldn't be sterile like a modern lab.
So kind of like a sourdough starter, but for beer, living in the pots.
Sort of, yeah. A resident microbiome in the brewing vessels, that seems the most plausible route.
Okay, so how do archaeologists like Dr. Nash tell the difference between a big state brewery and maybe someone just making a small batch at home? What are the telltale signs they look for?
Well, the big state breweries, like the one at Sarabamba, they're easier to spot because of the sheer scale, and the specialized buildings, the grinding room, the sprouting area, those unique boiling hearths. It all points to large-scale organized production. Finding smaller, household-level brewing is definitely trickier. The key indicator Dr. Nash and others often rely on is finding fragments of those narrow-necked jars we talked about, specifically jars showing that characteristic pitting on the inside surface. That's a strong sign of fermentation happening in that vessel.
So the pots themselves hold the clues.
Exactly. And future research, as Dr. Nash mentions, might get even more detailed, like analyzing microscopic starch grains trapped in the pottery walls, looking for damage patterns that only happen during fermentation. That could give even clearer evidence.
Now, Dr. Nash actually tried to recreate this Wari Chicha, didn't she? And tasted it. I always find that part fascinating, trying to taste the past. What did she say it was like?
Yes, she did, which is pretty cool. Her description was memorable. She said it tasted a lot like a goose.
Like a goose.
That was the description. And apparently, it was relatively flat, not much carbonation. She also mentioned being a bit hesitant to try modern, traditionally made chicha you might find in markets today, mainly due to hygiene concerns. Apparently, there have been public health efforts in the region to encourage boiling during the process, because some traditional methods, not necessarily Wari ones, involved chewing the corn, and sometimes things weren't boiled, leading to health issues.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the Wari method involving boiling was probably safer, and the fermentation they achieved. It wouldn't be like a modern controlled pitch of yeast, nor quite like a Belgian lambic spontaneous fermentation either. It was likely somewhere in between, relying on those resident microbes built up in their well-used vessels.
Right. Now, this impressive brewery at Sarabamba, it didn't last forever, did it? No. What does the archaeology tell us about how it ended?
No, it didn't. The evidence points to a ritual abandonment, sometime between about 1050 and 1150 AD, and this timing lines up with the general decline of the Wari Empire itself. What's really striking, as Dr. Nash describes it, is the evidence for what archaeologists call ritual distribution. It seems that before they burned the brewery roof down, someone deliberately went through and smashed beautiful pottery, especially those drinking cups. And they didn't just smash them, they carefully placed the broken pieces in different rooms, along with other valuable things like obsidian knife blades, bits of metal.
Wow, so deliberate, careful destruction.
Exactly. It wasn't just random vandalism or collapse, it looks very intentional, very systematic, like a ritual closing ceremony for this really important place. And intriguingly, some digging below the main floor level suggests there might have been an even earlier phase of the brewery underneath the one they excavated.
That ritual ending sounds incredibly powerful, like drawing a line under that era. So where does the research go from here? What avenues does Dr. Nash's work open up for the future?
Oh, there are lots of exciting possibilities. Dr. Nash has mentioned wanting to excavate more elite houses over at that other site, Sarabamba. That's where the smaller brewery was found. Digging into more houses there could tell us a lot more about who exactly was brewing. Was it widespread among the elite? Or just certain families? It helps understand the extent of this smaller-scale production. And maybe uncover other specialized activities that were happening in these elite compounds, too. By comparing different elite homes, we get a much richer picture of how their society was organized, who controlled what knowledge, what resources.
So, as you can hopefully appreciate now, the Wari Empire gives us this really compelling story. It shows how beer, Chicha, was deeply woven into the fabric of an ancient society. What might just seem like a simple drink was actually playing these huge roles in politics, in social structures, maybe even in their religious beliefs. It wasn't just about having a brew. It seems like it was a crucial tool for holding power, building relationships, making the whole Wari world work, It really makes you think, doesn't it, about the everyday things in our own society. What seemingly ordinary objects or practices today might hold similar kinds of hidden significance, similar power dynamics that maybe we don't even notice. Something to ponder, perhaps. Remember to subscribe for more insights into unexpected corners of history and culture.